First contact gone wrong. Lieutenant Marcus Kane thought he understood warfare until he met her. The battle had been raging for 3 hours above the mining colony of Kepler 442b, and humanity was winning. The Zephyrian fleet had retreated to the asteroid belt, their silver ships trailing plasma like wounded animals. Kane's squadron had cornered what appeared to be their final escape pod near the debris field of a shattered moon. The pod itself was a thing of beauty, even Kane had to admit. It spun slowly in the void, its surface rippling like liquid mercury under the harsh light of the system's twin suns. No distress signals, no surrender broadcasts, nothing. Just that hypnotic rotation that made Kane's eyes water if he stared too long. "Bring it aboard," Commander Torres ordered from the bridge of the UES Prometheus. Standard containment protocols. Full biohazard sweep. Kane suited up and descended to the cargo bay with his team. Sergeant Willis cracked jokes about alien anatomy while Corporal Martinez ran security scans. The pod's hull parted like flower petals when they applied the plasma cutter, revealing an interior that smelled of ozone and something else. Something that reminded Kane of his childhood home after summer rain. She was waiting inside, not unconscious or injured, but sitting cross-legged as if she'd been meditating. Her skin had a subtle blue-gray tint that shifted in the artificial light, and her eyes were too large, too knowing. She wore what looked like living armor that pulsed gently with her heartbeat. When she saw Kane, she tilted her head like a curious bird. "I surrender," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying harmonics that made Kane's chest vibrate. To the mercy of Terra's children. Kane kept his rifle trained on her, but something felt wrong. Prisoners didn't sit that calmly. They didn't smile like they knew a secret that would change everything. And they definitely didn't make seasoned. Soldiers feel like children playing at war. "Name and rank," Kane demanded, proud that his voice didn't shake. "I am Lirelei of the 7th Harmonic, voice of the deep current, keeper of the spiral path." She paused, still smiling. "But you may call me Lyra." Behind his helmet's faceplate, Kane frowned. Something about her manner, the way she held herself, the complete lack of fear in her posture. This wasn't how defeated enemies behaved. This felt like someone who had chosen to be captured. As they escorted her to the detention bay, Lyra hummed softly under her breath. The sound seemed to follow them through the corridors, and Kane noticed that the ship's ambient lighting flickered in rhythm with her voice. When he mentioned it to Martinez, the corporal just shrugged. Probably just a power fluctuation, LT, happens all the time. But Kane had been in space long enough to know that nothing on a military vessel happened by accident. Everything was designed, regulated, controlled. Everything except the alien woman who smiled too easily and made the lights dance to her song. This interrogation that changed everything 3 days later. Kane stood outside the observation deck of Detention Block 7, watching Lyra through reinforced transparisteel. She hadn't eaten the food they provided, claiming her people sustained themselves differently. She hadn't slept, instead spending the nights in that same meditative position, occasionally reaching out to touch the walls as if feeling for something. Commander Torres arrived with the interrogation team, a grim-faced group of intelligence officers who specialized in breaking alien prisoners. Kane had seen them work before. They were efficient, methodical, and utterly without mercy. "She's requested to speak with you specifically," Torres told Kane. "Claims she has information about Zephyrian fleet movements, but she only shared it with the soldier who captured her." Kane nodded, though unease crawled up his spine. In 3 days of captivity, Lyra had answered basic questions about her species, but revealed nothing of strategic value. Now suddenly she wanted to talk? The timing felt too convenient. The detention cell was spartanly furnished, a metal bench, a waste disposal unit, basic life support. Lyra sat in the center of the floor, her living armor having dulled to a deep purple that reminded Kane of twilight. When he entered, she opened her eyes and smiled that same knowing smile. "Lieutenant Kane," she said, rising gracefully to her feet. "Thank you for accepting my invitation." "This isn't a social call," Kane replied, activating the recording device on his wrist. "You said you had information about Zephyrian military assets." "I do." She moved closer, and Kane noticed that her footsteps made no sound on the metal floor. "But first, I must ask you something. Do you know why your people call this conflict the Zephyrian War?" Kane blinked. "Because you're Zephyrians. Your species attacked our colonies." Lyra's laugh was like wind through crystal chimes. "Oh, Marcus." "May I call you Marcus? We're not Zephyrians. That's what you've named us, but we are the Cathara, the Soul Weavers, the ones who remember what your people have forgotten." "What are you talking about?" She stepped closer still, and Kane could see flecks of silver in her large eyes, swirling like distant galaxies. "Your ancestors weren't the first to leave Earth, Marcus. They were the second. We left millennia ago. When the seas rose and the sky burned, we became something else, something more than human. But we never forgot our origins." Kane's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. "That's impossible. Humanity's first interstellar flight was less than 2 centuries ago." "The first recorded flight," Lyra corrected gently. "Your people have a talent for forgetting inconvenient truths. But we remember everything. We remember Terra. We remember the songs your children used to sing under alien stars." The recording device on Kane's wrist sparked and died. Throughout the ship, lights flickered in a pattern that matched Lyra's heartbeat. In the command center, officers stared at screens showing impossible energy readings emanating from Detention Block 7. "You're lying," Kane said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lyra reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand against the transparasteel barrier. Where her palm touched, the material began to sing, a low harmonic that Kane felt in his bones. "We didn't attack your colonies, Marcus," she whispered. "We were trying to come home." He song that breaks barriers. The transparasteel barrier dissolved like sugar in rain. Kane stumbled backward, raising his weapon, but Lyra made no move to escape. Instead, she stepped through the space where the wall had been and continued speaking, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Your weapons won't work," she said gently, noting Kane's frantic trigger pulls. "Not because I'd disabled them, but because you know in your heart that this isn't an attack." Kane's sidearm had indeed stopped functioning, its energy cells somehow drained. Around them, the ship's lights pulsed in waves, carrying Lyra's song through the ventilation systems and into every corner of the Prometheus. In the engineering section, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez watched in amazement as the fusion reactor's output stabilized to levels they'd never achieved before. "How?" Kane asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Music is mathematics," Lyra explained, moving past him into the corridor. "Mathematics is the language of the universe. When you understand the song that holds atoms together, walls become suggestions rather than barriers." They walked together through the ship, Kane's training warring with a strange sense of rightness. Crew members they passed stopped and stared, but none raised weapons or sounded alarms. Lyra's presence seemed to calm something fundamental in the human psyche, like a half-remembered lullaby from childhood. "The war between our peoples," she continued, "is built on a misunderstanding. Your leaders see us as invaders because we appear in systems you've claimed. But we're not conquering, Marcus. We're remembering." They reached the observation deck where Kane had first watched her 3 days ago. Through the massive viewport, the asteroid field where they'd found her pod drifted in the void. But now Kane could see patterns in the rock formations, geometries too perfect to be natural. "This system was once home to a Cathara colony," Lyra said, pressing her hand against the viewport. 12,000 years ago, before your ancestors developed writing, before they learned to work metal. We built cities in those asteroids, raised children who sang the old songs and dreamed of distant Earth. The rocks began to glow, a soft bioluminescence that revealed structures hidden within. Towers that spiraled like seashells, bridges that curved like frozen music, gardens where crystalline trees still reached toward long-dead suns. Cain sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed. If this is true, if you're really human descendants, then why didn't you identify yourselves? Why the fighting? Lyra turned from the viewport, and Cain saw tears on her alien, beautiful face. Because your people shoot first and ask questions later. Because in your haste to claim the galaxy, you've forgotten that others might have prior claim. Because fear makes monsters of us all. On the command deck, alarms should have been screaming. Security teams should have been mobilizing. But instead, Commander Torres stood mesmerized by the light show outside, feeling something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced since childhood Christmas mornings. "What do you want from us?" Cain asked. "Understanding," Lyra replied. "An end to this war built on ignorance. Your people have spread across 100 worlds, but you've never learned to listen to what those worlds were trying to tell you." She began to hum again, that same haunting melody from her cell. But now Cain heard it differently. Not as alien music, but as something achingly familiar. A song his grandmother might have sung, passed down through generations until its origins were lost, but its beauty remained. Throughout the ship, humans stopped what they were doing and listened. In the depths of space, Kithara vessels emerged. From hiding, their hulls singing in harmony with Lyra's voice. For the first time in 3 years of bitter conflict, the shooting stopped. The truth about Terra's children, Commander Torres, burst into the observation deck with a full security detail. Their weapons drawn, but somehow feeling heavier than usual. The sight that greeted him defied every protocol, every regulation, every assumption about prisoner management he'd learned in 30 years of military service. Lieutenant Cain sat across from the alien prisoner, sharing what appeared to be tea. From the officer's mess, neither was restrained. The detention cell's barrier had simply vanished, leaving behind a faint shimmer in the air like heat distortion. "Stand down," Cain said without looking up from his cup. "She's not a prisoner anymore." "Lieutenant, you're relieved of duty pending," Torres began, but Lyra raised her hand, and his words died in his throat, not silenced by force, but by the sudden understanding that what he was about to say would be foolish beyond measure. "Commander." "Torres," Lyra said, rising gracefully, "I've been hoping to speak with you. Your ship's logs contain something that belongs to both our peoples." Torres's hand moved to his sidearm, then stopped. The weapon felt foreign in his grip, like trying to threaten a favorite ant. "What logs?" "The archaeological surveys from the Centauri dig sites," she replied. "The artifacts your people found, but couldn't identify. The ones that sing when no one's listening." Torres's eyes widened. Those artifacts were classified at the highest levels, discovered on humanity's first colony world and stored in research facilities that didn't officially exist. Objects that predated human civilization, but showed clear signs of human craftsmanship. The paradox had driven Zen archaeologists to madness for decades. "How do you know about those?" he demanded. "Because we made them," Lyra said simply. "Before the Great Exodus, before we became what we are now. We left markers for those who would come after, hoping that someday our younger siblings would find them and understand they weren't alone." She moved to the viewport, gesturing at the growing fleet of Kithara vessels emerging from the asteroid field. Their ships moved like living things, their hulls rippling with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of technologies beyond current human understanding. "Your species has achieved in 2 centuries what took us millennia," she continued. Faster than light travel, terraforming, genetic engineering. But in your haste to claim the stars, you've forgotten how to listen to them. Kane set down his teacup, his mind reeling with implications. The colonial conflicts, the resource wars, the dead zones where nothing grows. Symptoms of the same. Disease, Lyra confirmed. You take what you need without asking permission, without understanding the consequences. Worlds that once sang with life fall silent under your machines. Torres found himself lowering his weapon entirely. Around them, his security team did the same, their faces slack with wonder as they watched the light show outside. The Kithara fleet wasn't positioning for attack. They were performing some kind of ritual, their ships weaving through space in patterns that hurt to look at directly. What are they doing? He asked. Healing, Lyra replied. This system has been wounded for 12,000 years, its songs interrupted by catastrophe. We're teaching it to remember how to dream. The asteroid field began to change, its chaotic tumbling stabilizing into ordered motion. The bioluminescence spread from rock to rock like a slow-motion fireworks display, and Kane realized he was watching the rebirth of a civilization that had slept for longer than recorded human history. The war, Torres said numbly. Our fleets. The casualties were never necessary, Lyra finished. Your people saw us as invaders because we appeared in systems you'd claimed. But we weren't invading, Commander. We were coming home to places that had been ours before your ancestors learned to use fire. On the bridge, communications officers reported impossible readings. The electromagnetic spectrum filled with music, complex harmonies that their instruments couldn't properly decode, but that somehow conveyed meaning deeper than language. It was a greeting, an invitation, and a promise all at once. What happens now? Kane asked. Lyra smiled, and for the first time since her capture, it reached her eyes. Now, Marcus, your people have a choice. They can continue their expansion as conquerors, fighting shadows and making enemies of their own forgotten family. Or they can learn to listen, to sing along with the music of the spheres. Outside, a new star was being born from the heart of the asteroid field, its light warm and welcoming as a mother's embrace. The Symphony of Two Worlds. 6 months after first contact, the Prometheus hung in orbit around a world that shouldn't exist. New Harmony, the Kithara called it, a planet they'd grown from asteroid dust and starlight in the span of weeks. Its surface gleamed with cities that sang, oceans that remembered ancient melodies, and forests where the trees grew in mathematical spirals that pleased both eye and ear. Kane stood in the observation lounge, no longer wearing the uniform of Earth's military, but the flowing robes of a student. The fabric responded to his emotions, shifting color with his thoughts, technology that was as much art as science. Beside him, Lyra hummed contentedly as she worked on what she called a memory crystal, encoding the day's experiences into crystalline matrices that would preserve them for millennia. My grandmother would have loved this place, Kane said, watching children play in the planet's rings, their laughter carrying across vacuum through means he was only beginning to understand. She does love it, Lyra replied, not looking up from her work. The memory of her love lives in you, and through you it touches everything you see. The Kithara learned long ago that death is just another kind of transformation. The integration hadn't been easy. Earth's government had initially declared Kane and the others aboard the Prometheus to be compromised, possibly brainwashed by alien influences. 3 separate rescue fleets had been dispatched before Admiral Chun arrived and experienced what they had all experienced, the sudden, overwhelming realization that humanity had been fighting itself all along. Now, human and Kithara worked together to undo centuries of damage. Worlds that had been strip-mined were learning to heal. Species driven to extinction by human expansion were being restored from genetic memory preserved in Kithara song libraries. The galaxy itself seemed to be awakening from a long nightmare. The Council of Worlds wants to know if we're ready for the next phase, Lyra said, her crystal complete and glowing with captured sunlight. Kane nodded. Earth's representatives had been meeting with Kithara speakers for months, trying to establish protocols for what came next. The revelation that humanity had family among the stars had changed everything, from military doctrine to philosophy. Children were being taught Kithara harmonics alongside basic mathematics. Scientists were learning to listen to the universe's background radiation and hear the music within. The Andromedans are ready to make contact, she continued. They've been watching both our peoples for millennia, waiting to see if we destroy ourselves or learn to sing together. Kane felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that had become his constant companion. First the Kithara, now news of a third group, another branch of the human family tree that had taken a different path to the stars. How many others were out there? How many cousins waited among the galaxies? "Will you come with us?" he asked. "To the meeting?" Lyra's smile was answer enough. Together, they walked to the Prometheus's new command center, where Commander Torres waited with a mixed crew of humans and Kithara. The ship itself had been transformed, its cold metal corridors replaced with living walls that pulsed gently, with bioluminescent veins. It was still recognizably human in design, but now it sang as it flew through space. "Ready for translation to the rendezvous point," Torres reported. His voice carried harmonics now, side effects of months spent in Kithara company. Some humans found the changes disturbing, but Kane thought his commander had never sounded more alive. "Take us out," Kane said, settling into his advisor's chair. The formal ranks and rigid hierarchies of military service had given way to something more fluid, more organic. The Prometheus folded space around itself, but instead of the violent wrenching of traditional FDL, the transition felt like stepping through a doorway made of starlight. They emerged near the galactic rim, where something vast and impossible waited in the void. The Andromedan vessel was less a ship than a small moon, its surface covered in what looked like forests and cities and things that defied classification. It sang to them across the emptiness, a greeting that brought tears to human eyes and made Kithara voices harmonize involuntarily. "The children of Terra," came a voice that spoke in every language at once, "have finally learned to sing together. Welcome, little ones, to the greater symphony." Kane looked at Lyra, then at the mixed crew around him, human and Kithara working in perfect harmony. The war was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. Outside, more ships appeared, representatives of a dozen human subspecies that had taken different paths to transcendence. The galaxy was full of cousins, and they were all coming home.